Claire, sir. Okay. All right. Welcome. We are here today to talk about tips and tricks that you all have used and to learn from each other about teaching in elder law, aging in the law courses. And with that, we will pass it to Richard. I think has some great tips that he'd like to share with the group. Or do you want a minute, Richard?
No, I'd like to make sure that things are showing up. I don't know what you can see. Anything?
Nothing yet, just all of us.
Unbelievable. We only went through this 5 times. And why don't you go to someone else? I'm going to play with this, though I'm not at all convinced. And
That's all right. No problem at all. Joan, do you want to take over now and
Sure thing. Sure thing. Sounds great. All right. Well, I am going to be talking today about mentoring, and mentorship is an important aspect of our students' time in law school. They learn, and it can be specifically important for the field of elder law. It's important for law students as they learn about elder law and develop their professional identities. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how I implemented a speed mentoring session as part of the Aging, Health, Equity, and the Law Conference. The Aging, Health, Equity, and the Law Conference was a one-day conference hosted by Touro Law Center in September of 2021. At the beginning of the semester, I organized the conference. It was online, and the conference theme focused on structural and systemic questions about discrimination and equity that older adults experience, and on policies recognizing these different challenges and promoting equity. It was an interdisciplinary conference featuring presentations from faculty across law schools and lawyers, as well as medical providers. In the plenary session, our very own section executive committee member, Nina Cohen, gave our keynote address, and there were presentations and a discussion group. The presentations highlighted a number of fields intersecting with elder law at the intersection of health law, employment law, property law, civil rights law, and family law. I built the conference around concurrent tracks for the sessions, and one of those tracks featured predominantly presentations on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on older adults. This presentation and the discussion group provided insights in pursuing systemic changes in policy in the law and how to better support all individuals as we age. And we were lucky enough to have 2 of our executive committee members present, and they're here today, Naomi Kahn and Richard Kaplan. So Naomi presented along with Claire Huntington and Elizabeth Scott in their presentation, Health, Equity, and Opportunity in the 100-Year Life. And Richard presented on incorporating cultural sensitivity in elder law courses. I included in the conference a speed mentoring session and a networking session to support community building in our field and allow for interaction and conversation for the participants in this online environment. The mentors for this speed mentoring session were Jean Axios, Senior Vice President for AARP, Thought Leadership and International Affairs, Denny Chan, Directing Attorney of Justice and Aging, 2 Touro alum, Robin Berner-DeLeo of Law Offices of Robin Berner-DeLeo, and Joan Robert of the Robert Law Group, as well as Nina Cohen of our section, and Tiffany Graham, Touro's Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion and Associate Professor of Law. A goal was for mentors to share their guidance on professional development and lend a hand up to law students, to lawyers, and those building their academic career that were participating as attendees in the speed mentoring session. The mentoring session specifically encouraged students to join as active participants and gave a space for them to gain information on the practice of elder law. In terms of victories and challenges with the speed mentoring session, There were policymakers, elder law attorneys, and faculty. They had an opportunity to share their experience in small groups with the attendees. We used Zoom breakout rooms. It acknowledged a need for mentorship, and it gave a space within the conference and for students to have an introduction to that mentorship by intentionally creating spaces in our educational offerings for students as mentees to learn directly from practitioners and faculty acting as mentors. We can create opportunities for student development of professional identity. And a session like this can be a chance to begin to form relationships in the profession to build careers. And it also engaged alum, not only as mentors, but as mentees to participate in the conference. So it engaged the larger law school community. In terms of challenges, I would have hoped for even greater attendance by the law students, and I will promote it more heavily with our Office of Career Development and Student Bar Association in creating upcoming conferences. We did have a strong showing by the Toro Law Review student editors as articles from the conference are being published in an upcoming issue of Toro Law Review. And in terms of logistics in that Zoom space, breakout rooms did work well, and attendees were notified in advance of the names and the titles and had bio information on each of the mentors. But the attendees were able to select at the time of the mentoring session which breakout room they could go to in advance. I would actually add that breakout room number information with the advanced materials provided to the participants. The need to foster student professional identity is recognized by the new standards on legal education. So there are new ABA standards as to professional identity formation for students. The ABA's revision to accreditation standard 303B is the addition of 303B3. A law school should provide substantial opportunities for students for the development of a professional identity. And there's a new interpretation 3035, and in part that states, because developing a professional identity requires reflection and growth over time, students should have frequent opportunities during each year of law school and in a variety of courses and co-curricular and professional development activities. I hope that such a speed mentoring session can be incorporated into my home institution's future conferences, as well as for other law school conferences seeking to build professional identity formation opportunities in their training of future attorneys. Thanks so much for listening.
I love that, Joan. That's wonderful. And that's such a huge topic of conversation at our school with professional identity formation and revising courses and programming. Oh, it looks like, oh, Richard, great. We see it. Yep. You're muted, Richard. So Joan, I know I have some questions in my mind about your presentation, which I loved, and I really learned a lot from it. But since Richard is on right now, why don't we table it until after his presentation? Richard, can you hear us?
Yes, and you can hear me and see me now?
Yes.
Great, appreciate my friend Josh Gunung, who rescued me once again. So thank you for including me in this program. And I also want to thank Joan for including me in the program last September. That was great fun. This morning or afternoon, as the case may be, I'm going to present 3 discrete ideas that I use in my elder law class. They deal with core topics within the typical elder law curriculum. The first one is end-of-life care planning. The second one is determining the residence for the older person. And the third one is long-term care insurance as a topic. So let's take a look at the first. And the end-of-life care planning, the basic idea is as a concluding exercise to have a joint session with second semester medical students. And this is actually held as a third session for the law students. The law students will have had 2 complete classes on advanced directives, healthcare surrogacy, and the like. The medical students will have talked about in their training a number of sessions, and then I also prepared a 20-minute PowerPoint for them as to get them into some of the legal lingo. And the basic idea is that we create small teams of both law students and medical students to discuss actual cases that they have had or that have come up in the practice of my colleague on the medical school faculty. In fact, that's a key point. I co-teach this with a practicing physician who is also the chair of the ethics committee in one of the major hospitals here. And basically, these case studies deal with such issues as finding out whether there's an advanced directive already existent. Does it apply to the scenario that they are dealing with? Is the agent that is designated competent? Because oftentimes these advanced directives have been prepared well in advance. In addition, there may be questions about the healthcare surrogacy statute. They will have already seen the Illinois statute in detail. And the question is, the person or possible designee available? Are they themselves competent? Are they the top priority? And so this is a concluding exercise on the topic of end-of-life care planning, literally for the law student side, the third of 3 sessions. Moving on to the second idea regarding where a person will live, which I conceive as one of the 3 big issues in elder law, along with what will the person live on and who will pay for healthcare or how they'll pay for healthcare. And this time it's not the concluding exercise, it's an introduction. And specifically, I asked students ahead in advance to talk to their family members, see if they've ever had to move an older person out of that person's home. Why was it necessary? And then we kind of begin the class by asking, why might an older person not be able to continue living in his or her own residence? The general premise from the data is that people really want to stay in their own residence just as long as possible. And so I fill the board, typically a whiteboard, that fills the room with various issues that have come up as to why a person cannot continue to live in the home the way they have. And then we go through them for the rest of the class, coming up with ideas of what might be done in order to enable them to stay in the residence and not have to move, thereby avoiding transfer trauma and the whole process of having to move. And so every year the list is a little bit different depending on what students offer, but this way it's very interactive and they fill up the board with the reasons why they think a person needs to move. Things like maintaining the cost of the residence, utilities, property taxes, insurance. They need to go to a bathroom, but the bathroom is on the 2nd floor, structural impediments dealing with stairs. It could be that they need some medical assistance, not needing the full armamentarium of a nursing home, but they do need some degree of medical assistance. And the question is, can that be brought in on a temporary basis or a couple hours a day? Do they need to have repairs made? Can this be financed with reverse mortgages? That sort of thing. People can find a fairly comprehensive list in the article that I've cited on the slide. And if people can't find it, it's on Hein Online. I can also send them a PDF where I list some of the most common offers or ideas that people have put forward. And then the rest of the class is kind of interactive. What could we do to solve this? With the goal always of enabling the person to stay in the residence just as long as they can. They will have to make some accommodations, but the idea is still they can't live there the way they always have, but perhaps with some accommodations they can do so. The third topic is long-term care insurance. And again, this is the introduction. Once again, I've asked people to talk to their family members, asking them whether it's parents, grandparents, whatever, do they have long-term care insurance? Usually the answer is no, so then follow up and ask why not. And I caution the students, don't argue with them, just write down their objections. And that's how we begin the class. Why might someone not have full long-term care insurance in place. And once again, I fill the board with the various objections, and we just lay them out, get as many people to participate as possible. And then the rest of the class, and typically the succeeding class, goes through each of those, not with the idea of rebutting them, but with amplifying them, seeing what can be done, and seeing whether they are valid or what responses could be done to at least consider long-term care insurance as an option. So sometimes people have myths that they don't need long-term care insurance because they're already covered. They have Medicare, they have Medigap. They may say they don't need it because they're not going to live that long, kind of denial. They may have family members who they think are going to be willing and able to help. They may have looked into long-term care insurance, found it to be too expensive. Perhaps they thought they wouldn't qualify on the basis of pre-existing medical conditions, or perhaps they found the options very confusing. There's cash flow questions. So there could be a whole range. And again, each year is a little bit different. And once again, for people who want to see some of the most common objections and some of the responses, you can see the article that I've cited. But in both of these cases, that is with a residence or with long-term care insurance, these exercises are at the very beginning to kind of lay out what are some of the objections or the standard responses, and then to kind of see what could be done as part of an elder law approach to enable the person to stay in their residence in that first instance, or to consider long-term care insurance and take a look at that as an option. By this point, we will have covered Medicare. We would have only briefly touched on Medicaid. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it to whomever is next.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. I'm just stopping your screen sharing here. Actually, I think you may have to do that, Richard.
Well, I will close it out.
Okay. That's a nice scene. It looks like Cabo.
You might have to go to the top of your screen, and there could be an option for stop sharing. Ah, great. Perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's a lot of information, and it's great. This is meant to be speed sharing ideas so we can learn from each other and with each other. Before we jump into other topics, does anyone have questions for both Joan and Richard before we move forward? One question that I have is for anyone sharing today, if you have the materials that you've used in your course, if you could share that with the group, if you're open to sharing it. And it's a question too for Clarissa with AALS. Are we able to post it on our sections page attached to this recording, Clarissa?
Yes.
Okay.
With that.
Okay, fantastic. So maybe if you want to send it to me, I can forward it on to Clarissa, or if you want to put it in the chat, I'm going to put my email here so you have it. And we can get that posted on our section page. One question that I had that popped up with respect to Joan's presentation for the speed mentoring. I love it, and I know it's always a struggle to get participation in programming and events. And obviously students should do it. It's great. And it's just a matter of getting them in the room and to the table. Did you see, or were you able to track whether or not some of the relationships continued on beyond the speed networking session?
Some of the relationships may have continued because they were faculty members at the law center. And so that was kind of a built-in benefit to that, having some of the mentors be either alum or actual full-time faculty at the law center. But that would be the next part of a mentoring session, to have a structure for those who were able to meet, have a exchange of information, including email and beyond that. And as I think about how we can institute mentoring in co-curricular activities at law centers. I hope that it can become part of conference present structure or other co-curricular structures, so students can expect to have that opportunity to meet with practitioners or other leaders in the field and have that opportunity to make the connection. But that is the next step, is to build in that expectation.
Right. No, that's great. And then my other question too, that just structurally it popped into my head. When you have these breakout rooms or the students have the option to meet with one person versus another, did you see a lot of clumping towards a certain person or area? Was it hard to kind of spread the students out so that everyone was able to talk to the students? And
yeah, I did see that the practitioners, the Toro alum, did receive a number of students there. And which was marvelous for building the law center community. So students were interested in speaking to elder law practitioners out in the field. I saw that, and that was absolutely terrific. So there were an unequal number of mentees to mentors, and I could see this happening more, and the logistics would have to get more facile with that if the session was a longer session, that you could then change the breakout rooms and have students meet more than one mentor during the session itself. We just had one session, but I could see that it could be built in, that it was more of a speed mentoring session with visiting multiple mentors during the session.
yeah, that's great. That's great. Does anyone else have questions?
Yeah, I do. And I'll start with my question for Joan. Thank you. I really enjoyed that. It's something I think about quite a bit. And I thought that was exciting how you were engaging alum, not just as mentors, but potential mentees. And it also gets to this idea of lifelong learning and upskilling and changing fields as practitioners may wish to do. So I thought that was really interesting. And my question is more kind of logistical. Did certain themes emerge, or rather than say, and maybe you said this and I missed it, but rather than say meet with different practitioners or faculty members or those with this expertise, did you have end of life or like certain areas that could help folks that also wanted a mentor but also wanted to know more about a subject area? Or I welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we did not for that. This was our first launch of this speed mentoring session as part of a Toro Law Center conference, as far as I'm aware. And I appreciate that idea of designating not only mentors that they could choose, but topics. But we had it largely on professional development. So you could go to, let's say, a practitioner or a policymaker, or for junior faculty looking for assistance in professional development, an associate dean. So I tried to cover a number of areas, but that notion that you suggest, Tara, of identifying a topic, I have seen that done in other conferences. So for example, on July 21st, the Legal Writing Institute Biennial Conference is going to be incorporating a speed mentoring session, and they've identified in the promotional materials that there'll be speed mentoring. Within one session, you can go to a mentor to discuss scholarship or service and leadership or navigating tenure and promotion or teaching or diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's this notion of identifying a topic, and the mentors will be associated with that topic. So I think that model that you suggest is one that is being adopted by other conference organizers.
I was just wondering how you select the range of mentors and their profiles, about whether they're young and old, and whether you have LGBTQ and other, because people have a very fixed, especially younger, have a very fixed idea of what elder means as well. And I was wondering in these programs, how you explore that at the outset to get some understanding of what they consider old.
Mm-hmm.
And aging, and who your clients might be. If you said they're coming to see you, and what would they look like? What would they be? What would your understanding be of who your client would be, to get some sense of their biases and cultural experience, not just biases, but just their life experience most of the time. So I was wondering how you do that, and what the results have been.
Well, Leonard, I would have loved for you to have been a presenter at our Aging, Health, Equity, and the Law conference. This is just the kind of conversations that we're engaging in the presentations. So, and as to the actual mentoring session itself, I looked to, in creating it, looked to if I could get a cross section of those who are educating and making change within the elder law community. So I looked for policymakers at the national level. So Jean Axios from thought leader at AARP, and Denny Chan for Justice and Aging, I thought would work with that. I did look to get faculty members involved, not only at our own school, but Nina at Syracuse and at Yale, and practitioners as well. And those practitioners were alum. And so in terms of, I looked at what they had to offer for potential audience members being students, attorneys new to the field of elder law or looking to transition from another area into elder law, and then also junior faculty looking to get advice from more established faculty in the field. And we had a diverse panel in terms of gender and other ways. So I think the students would see themselves reflected in those who participated as mentors. And then each of the mentors I asked fabulously were willing to do it. It was one of the last sessions of the conference. So they had devoted their time and effort and energy. And I was so thrilled that they were able, they wanted to see this. There is a certain level of career satisfaction that can come from being the mentor position or being able to share your experience with those coming up the pipeline.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Richard, I got your note, so we will get that law review article on the section webpage. Thank you so much for that. And Joan, if you have any materials you want to share, forward it on and we'll get those posted. And I think, Leonard, the same question can go to Richard too. I was thinking that just understanding where the students are coming from and some of their perspectives and what's shaping their decision in terms of keeping family members at home versus, taking them out of the house and end of life decisions, because culturally there's a lot that people and students come to the table with already in their heads, and they may not be open to certain thoughts or plans. So in addressing that with your students, has that come up, and how do you address that?
You're absolutely right, Katie. And it's ginormous because many people do not want to share. Some people are literally going through it as we speak. In fact, oftentimes I've asked, why are people taking elder law as a course? And more than half the time it's they have dealt with this within the immediate couple months, or they're dealing with their grandparents right now. Sometimes it's involving different cultures if they have foreign-born grandparents. Other times it's professional. One of the students in this past course was a nurse in an emergency room for nearly 10 years. And then it had enough and had come to law school. Well, needless to say, he had a very different view on a lot of these issues, including whether people should be in nursing homes at all and what that kind of existence consists of and the like. One of the things I try to do is make people comfortable. And to that extent, I never call on anybody. So that is unlike the tax class where I'll use Socratic dialogue and get people involved. This is entirely volitional. I will sometimes try to talk to some people in advance of class and ask if they'd be willing to share, if they have told me something privately. And sometimes they do, but it's very important to avoid stereotyping, particularly when we talk about ethnic differences in how some of these issues are approached. And on this question of what can you do, for example, to enable an older person to stay in their home? I don't call on anybody. I just say it's open-ended. And maybe last time we had a class of about 40, I'd say no more than 6 or 8 volunteered. Other people shook their heads, they agreed with, but they didn't feel like they wanted to share, even though I indicated this is not necessarily about what your family did. if you didn't have a chance or didn't want to share, what might you think an older person might confront and need to move residents? So it could be purely theoretical based on what you imagine. Nevertheless, I think it's very difficult to call on people and put them on the spot. And so I thought over the course of several different classes, I'm pleased to see that most people did participate, but on any given class, never more than about, say, 5 to 10, which is about 25% of the class. But it is tough. And one of the things I do, we didn't really talk about it, is to make people feel more comfortable. And that is the very first full week of class, we talk about ethics. Who is the client? Is the client competent? And in that circumstance, it's not personally revelatory. And so I'm able to get virtually everybody to participate, to comment on one of the Donaldson hypotheticals that I use, as to say, what would you do if you're the lawyer in this circumstance? And so they at least begin to hear their voice in the classroom. Many people will then clam up for the next several weeks or months, and so be it. But even with the racial diversity that we have, you can tell that some people don't want to come up with what they do. And so it's a dilemma. One of the advantages, of course, of having diverse classes is that people will share these experiences. They may be visually diverse, but some people are not visually diverse. I'm thinking of the LGBT folks who I don't have any way really of detecting who is whom. And so they may share, and that's great if they do, but it's very important to make people feel comfortable.
That's wonderful. All right. Anyone else have any questions or any thoughts or tips they want to share from their course that they've used in the past? Yeah, Kendall, go ahead.
Yeah, I had wanted to just share a couple things, some of which I built on from Mary Radford, who used to teach the elder law course before I took it on. And I was able to benefit a lot from auditing her class and watching her teach and her approach. But, you know, to Joan's point about professional identity formation and the idea that, you know, students walking into law and the elderly class are coming at it from a lot of different perspectives, right? And a lot of different reasons why they're taking the class. Some students are just curious. Some students know this is what they want to do. Some students are actually wanting to learn to be able to really relate to what's happening in their lives, like what was discussed. But starting off, Mary always did this exercise, which I think is fantastic, and I added to it, which is to interview somebody 65 or older, and it doesn't matter who it is, and ask them. She had them ask 3 questions. What is, you know, what's something that surprised you the most about growing older? What's, you know, do you feel that people treat you differently? And what do you think, you know, we need to change as a society about how people are treated? I added another question, which is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected you? And I've also added the, if you're able to, and if they're willing, you know, if you would video it. And so just that first initial, before they even walk into class, that's kind of what we talk about. And everyone shares, and we'll play the video if there is a video. And, you know, we talk about why some people might be uncomfortable with being videotaped. We talk about that piece of it. The COVID-19 pandemic definitely, I think there are a lot of preconceived ideas this past semester of why, of what the responses would be. And some people actually didn't think it affected their lives at all, because they just weren't going out and doing as much, you know, depending on who it was that they were interviewing. Some people it affected drastically. So that was really interesting and eye-opening. I also have the students take the implicit association test. I know that that's not necessarily, it's been somewhat questioned as to whether it's really valid and reliable in terms of a research tool, but I do think it's helpful in developing self-awareness about just kind of where you're coming from and really thinking a little bit about how you approach people who are older. And so we have that conversation. And then what I've built on, and again, because it really does inform how the students are thinking about even those conversations about ethics and competence and building a law practice and how it would be, you know, most accessible to the people, the clients that individuals want to serve. I added 2 other very short assignments. One is for students to actually find an example of an age stereotype. And it can be, you know, just in mass media. I had students that found TikToks, that found commercials, Beatles song, lots of different things. So people are able to bring a little bit of themselves to it and share those. We didn't spend a lot of class. I just showed some representative examples, but so, you know, I did post those on my learning page, and so students were able to see what other people had found. But the new assignment that I added was to actually have students watch a movie that somehow related to elder law. So it had to have some sort of relation to elder law. And the reason I was thinking about this is because there was a lot of discussion a couple of years ago when I Care a Lot came out about using that as a tool, a teaching tool with respect to guardianship and that type of thing. And I had thought about movies in general. And so I did this assignment. It's a small percentage of their grade. It was just 5 to 7 pages. And this is a paper class. So students do have to write. So it kind of gets them warmed up into the writing mode anyway. And I said, you know, just pick a movie that deals with elder law. And then what I want you to do is talk about what the theme is and reflect on whether the movie was effective in communicating and expanding on its theme, the ways in which it related to their personal experience, whether the movie challenged or affirmed their beliefs, ideas, or prior assumptions, and incorporate examples. I developed a rubric. If any of you are interested in seeing that, I'm happy to share that. But that was actually a very short assignment, and I wasn't sure how it was going to play out. I didn't know if law students would say this is just like back to undergrad, but they actually really, I think, got a lot out of it. We had a class discussion about it, and students picked, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie The Father with Anthony Hopkins, told from his perspective, you know, as he's suffering from, I think he was suffering from Alzheimer's in that movie. You know, Cocoon, which I had totally forgotten about that movie. The Intern, so in the employment setting. So just a lot of different movies, and it not only showed their personalities and the things that they were interested in, they could talk about, but also just the things that challenged or reaffirmed what they really had experienced. And so we were able to have that kind of broader conversation about what they were looking, you know, the lens through which they were looking at people who were 65 or older and how they might approach them and how some of what their prior assumptions were being challenged. And so I thought that was really helpful because we kind of kept coming back to that as we moved through the course. And students seemed to be much more cognizant of it than they were the first time I taught the class, when I spent a little bit less time on stereotypes in general. So that was kind of a fun assignment. And then the other thing I did this year, and it was by happenstance, there was an interdisciplinary conference on aging at my university. And I had actually learned about it through another colleague who was involved with one of our centers. And she just said, you might be interested in this conference. And so it was a number of students in the Institute for Gerontology, sociologists, medical students from other universities. It was a big kind of collaborative exercise, and it was a very traditional research model where everyone had posters and they were explaining things, and there were other students. at the graduate level. And so I had my students, instead of class, go to this and engage with the individuals who had done this research. And wasn't really sure how that would play out and whether it would be really helpful, but I thought, let's just try it and see. And this is a class. My class is like I said, a paper class. So they're either writing their paper for the writing requirement or they're writing a shorter research paper. But either way, they are looking at novel ideas, novel ways to approach, for example, solving the long-term care insurance issue, right? Those types of things. And this was a way for them to really start thinking in more research terms and how the work that we do as lawyers does intersect so much with all of these other disciplines, and that we cannot be just thinking in a silo. And so out of that, I've talked with the people who put that conference on about maybe whether the law school can host it. Can we collaborate with our Center for Health, Law, and Society on this? And so anyway, it's just every once in a while something kind of pops up and it just works. And so it was an opportunity to really try something different. And if there's a way that we can have it coincide with this class moving forward, I'm going to try to, because the students seem to really get a lot out of it. So those were my two kind of ideas that I wanted to share.
I love all of it. That sounds wonderful. Does anyone have questions for Kendall?
Not a question, but another movie to add on that list, which might not strike people, Friends with Benefits, which is mainly about a young couple, but the Justin Timberlake's father is in the very beginning of losing. And so it's in that transition period where he's out and among us, but thinks that his wife is still with him and so forth. And it's not the sort of elder law type movie, but it brings up a lot of issues that younger people are going to confront in that incipient stage.
And that was actually a movie that a student selected. Some students did also select I Care a Lot. And a student called and asked me or emailed me and said, can I choose a horror movie? If that's what you like, yeah. Does it relate to elder law? And they said, I think so. And I said, well, then go for it. Sorry, I just lost my screen. There we go. So anyway, there was a lot of different genres, and I thought about having a list of different movies, but I decided to let the students really just define it for themselves, because they were going to have to write about how it intersected. So I figured somebody chose On Golden Pond. So there was just a lot of different variety in terms of how they connected it, right? Because that's interesting. And then also what they chose. There's a new horror movie called, I think it's called Old. It's an M. Night
I haven't seen that yet, but yes. Yeah.
So anyway.
So interesting. Len, I saw you put something in the chat. Yeah. No, do you want to explain that?
I know you're teaching aging in place and universal design and others, and we've been using this. We developed it. We work a lot on architecture. We have an arrangement with a nursing college now as well, and their gerontological center. So we do a lot of cooperative, both research, interviewing, and talking about grieving, end of life. And so we do a lot of practical issues. That's what the clinic does as well. And this is one thing we prepared and updated, and it's been incorporated into design, and remodelers in Ireland has used it. So it's actually fairly easy to use, in that it's not prescriptive, and it's just a good way to do a walkthrough. We have a companion conduct your own home survey, because the idea is we're really trying to work on getting children to understand the different issues that are involved in changing inches or designing, and what barriers are there that you might not think of confronting. We do it with elder persons, but a lot of the times we use kids and sleepovers. Who can come to your house with a sleepover? And one of the things I was interested in is whether you've used any tool like Michelle Norris's 6 words, and you can go online and look it up, but she started it with race. And it says 6-word race, and just put down any 6 words. And we've done it with disability, we've done it with diversity, and you just let people do it. And we get a lot of things unfiltered. We just want people to be candid, and we don't associate them, an individual, with the response. And then we just sort of post the responses. And she has a postcard wall that has, I think, hundreds of thousands of them. And we've done aging and elder or old, and just to see what people do. And that's a good icebreaker, because we just have people comment on what other things have said. So I was wondering what other tools you use, or how you get these discussions started, because I know everyone touched upon people not wanting to participate or to say things that might be considered, biased or crude or whatever. So that's what I'd like to know in your classes, because I don't teach a traditional class. I do a lot of group representation. We have project meetings for legislation and others. So any kind of icebreakers you have where you can get to the heart, I'd really appreciate.
I've done something similar to the 6 words. It's you can sign up for it for free, but it's the word clouds, right? So people can input whatever word comes to their mind. You prompt them with a question, and then you can show the general thing in front of the class to see which words are larger. People have said them more often. I found that helpful with starting conversations.
Just at a conference where a presenter, her name is Amy Clymer. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she focuses on creativity. But I actually am planning on implementing something like this in my classes, which is she has these cards, and you could do it with anything, but like pictures. And you just say, okay, like if you have a word, it's kind of a word association with the picture. So what picture most makes you think of growing older, right? And so maybe I pick the clock, because that's like time is flying, time is going by, or whatever it is. But then people really kind of engage, and it gets people to be thinking in a different way about what it is that you're asking. And so I found that was really an interesting way to start conversations that I hadn't contemplated.
There are also those apps that age you, and it's kind of interesting to have everyone participate in that activity, and maybe even with their loved ones or friends, and then ask different scenarios where retirement or long-term health, long-term care insurance, like different things that maybe you think about differently as you're looking into the mirror, looking at what you might look like when you're 85 or over. That could be a way to make something that seems like it's not pertinent to you now much more real, and also a nice icebreaker. Anyway, I just wanted to add, I've been typing like mad. These are such fantastic ideas, and what I really like about it is I teach my courses online. I've been teaching online for a decade, and I have, and many of your ideas, while you're explaining, how you're doing them in person, mainly for law students, but you may have some from nursing or medicine. My area is slightly challenging in that it's online and it's very multidisciplinary. So it's about a quarter are law students, but the remaining are across all the health sciences. So pharmacy, medicine, public health, and nursing, and quite a few business students, and then some folks in engineering, and also in architecture, with more of that tech, urban environment adaptation. So it's a really diverse class, which makes it difficult to say, you're going to be a future elder law practitioner, things to look at. But instead, many of you brought up these great ideas about, one of them I really like, where it might have been from you, Richard, where what would you do in this situation if you were the elder law attorney? But I think we can expand that. So what if you were the provider, or if you were the or a parent, or or a child, or a nurse? So I think some like really nice interactive online role playing might be another way to get to your question, Len, about how do you sort of remove some of the potential biases in the front of this. And I think role playing different perspectives could be helpful too. And that in an online format to complement what you're doing in person can also remove it a bit as well. And one other thought I had with your whiteboard suggestion, Richard, was one thing you can do online with word clouds as well, or polling, is you could have everyone can participate in some ways about, what would be some of the barriers you think about when an older adult needs to change their residence. You could actually, I don't know if you already do this in your course, but once everything's up there, you have discussions and you can begin to prioritize sort of the top 3 biggest areas to think about. And that could be a way to take it a step forward after you create the word cloud or the covered whiteboard, to have this different polling and votes, and that could potentially turn into maybe a reflection paper for one of the students. But anyway, I just wanted to draw upon this really nice exchange where maybe the initial focus is traditional in-person law students, but how well it seems to adapt on an online platform as well as across disciplines. So thank you very much.
And to respond to Tara, that is what I did when during COVID, all courses were online. So I had to kind of keep that track and make that list. I did not find it as effective, but and online, the experience, it's even less likely for people to participate or even be on screen. But that was what I had to do. And the advantage was there were some people who would never raise their hand in a physical class, but here they could just type it. The other advantage is that you're quite right. I was able to do a lot of polling and in online, and I try to do that in person, asking people to raise their hand. Not as effective. Actually, that was one of the things where I think online instruction is superior, getting not 100%, but close to 100% response. Now, what I've done in person, I didn't really talk about this, was when we're talking about pensions and management of financial assets, is the idea that people are supposed to do this on their own. And I talk about this in the article. And here I do call on a few people who I know have some background and just say, okay, you think you can manage these pension assets yourself or these retirement account assets? Just how much do you know? How many companies are in the Dow Jones index? That kind of thing. And I do it in the format of, do you really want to be a millionaire? So if a student doesn't want to answer, they can call on a friend, or we'll poll the audience and do multiple choice and that sort of thing, with the idea of just showing that even some of these people with MBAs, they may not be as swift as they may think, but whatever. I know I see in the chat that we're running out of our time, but I appreciate Tara's comments. I also enjoyed her presentation. I think it was at a different conference that Indiana University had a couple months ago. So I'm glad to finally see you.
Well, thank you, everyone. We are coming up on our hour. I know I want to be respectful of time, and some people may need to leave. Really quick, there was a question in the chat. If someone can please post the fear hat exercise. I'm not sure what this is, but if someone can either post it or email it to me, I'll make sure it's up on our section board. Rebecca, this is great. You do several exercises based on Sue Bryant's 5 Habits article at orientation. This is great. Rebecca, do you mind sending us the article so we can share it with our section members?
Sure, no problem.
Thank you so much.
I'll send you the fear hat, because
Wonderful.
essentially we ask people to write. It depends on what the question is, but it's usually your fear of coming into the clinic and representing people. So it could be on almost any aging issue, and everybody writes it, and then you put it in a hat. And then someone else reads it, and then we discuss, the context for it and what the person might be thinking without identifying whoever wrote it. And then we sort of post all of them and share them as well afterward. So it's a way of people expressing the reservations they might have about any part of this engagement, planning, making the wrong decision, not being quick enough. And so I'll send that around, but it's basically formatted that way, just asking a question.
Yeah, interesting. A version of that would be, what is your greatest fear about getting old?
Definitely. Okay, well, thank you all so much. I appreciate you being here, sharing your ideas, listening, participating. And we will now end the recording.